Hello, students. I am Dr. Anurag Agrawal, professor in English, and a very warm welcome to all of you students from the entire country today in my second batch of UGC NET English live classes. Just to tell you in brief that UGC NET is a very prestigious exam which is being held in the entire country since past more than 30 years, and the students who have been qualifying this exam, they get an opportunity to become lecturer and assistant professors in the degree colleges and the universities all over India. So today I'm going to start the first chapter, that is known as the medieval period, which starts from 1066 to 1485. क्लियर स्टूडेंट्स, यहीं से हम इंग्लिश लिटरेचर की शुरुआत करते हैं. 1066 में एट द बैटल ऑफ हेस्टिंग्स एक हुआ था, बैटल ऑफ हेस्टिंग्स, जिसमें एक किंग था जिसका नाम था हैरल्ड. द सैक्सन किंग ऑफ इंग्लैंड वाज डिफीटेड बाय विलियम द कॉन्करर. एंड हु वाज विलियम द कॉन्करर? द ड्यूक ऑफ नॉर्मंडी, who invaded England to support his claim that he had been promised the British throne. He was an efficient and ruthless soldier with a number of experienced soldiers of fortune among his followers. And William the Conqueror was able to conquer this whole country. And the Normans, Normans, a name which has been derived from the Northmen. Who were these? They were in large part descended from the Vikings from the southern western France, who became to be known as Normandy. And more than 100 years in France, the Normans had adopted many French customs and had their own variation of the language, that is the French language, the Norman French. They were a curious people. They were superb soldiers. They were excellent administrators, lawyers, great borrowers, but lacking inventiveness and original ideas. Roughly from the 11th to the 15th century, Western Europe achieved a complete civilization and a complete culture of its own. Although our present day civilization has grown directly out of the medieval civilization, life of the Middle Ages was far different from what we know today. The church was responsible for the spiritual life of the Christendom, linking together all the kingdoms, the dukedoms, the principalities, the free cities of the Western and the Central Europe. And the greatest single achievement of the Middle Ages was the idea of the Commonwealth of Christendom, a kind of spiritual and cultural empire uniting men of different nationalities, but speaking many different languages and enjoying many different regional ways of life. If we talk about the medieval society, everybody knew that the place in the society, men of the humble birth might be promoted to positions of great power and influence only in the church. Medieval life was austere in many ways. No modern comforts and convenience, not much choice in the dresses. Travel was difficult and even dangerous, and food, even for the wealthy, offering little variety. And the most of the foodstuffs could not be preserved. Sometimes a lot has to be eaten quickly, and this explains the special feast times. Because there was no industry, no enormous factories pouring out smoke, no railroads, no dark cities, both in the towns and in the countryside, the Middle Ages were bright and full of color. And it was actually a perpetual feast to the eyes. And a great noble would have a crowd of retainers dressed in gay livery. In spite of the treasured memory of great heroes like King Richard, he was known as the lion-hearted. The history of the Crusades makes mournful reading. Each crusade began in high hope, in a genuine desire to rescue Jerusalem from the Turks. But most of them ended, you can say, in looting, raiding, and a tangle of power politics. Fine. So today we can use the term chivalrous, Bahaduri, to describe the conduct and the well-mannered and the sensitive man towards women. And the medieval romance is considered largely of tales of chivalry, to which were added a love interest and all sorts of wonders and marvels. That is the fairy enchantments, the dragons, the giants, the sorceresses, and the medieval concept of romantic love came from France. Indeed, the first English romances, that is, we can say the verses and later on the prose tales relating the knights undertook for the ladies were translations from where? These were translations from the French, and they were abridged to concentrate on adventure and eliminate the long moralizing speeches about love. And it took about 250 years for the Normans and the Saxons, उसी से बना है Norman Saxons, to merge their individual identities into one English nation. Unfortunately, for both England and France, the English monarchy never voluntarily relinquished its hold on the French possessions. As a result, there were numerous costly wars in France, culminating in a series of wars known as 100 Years' Wars. 100 Years' Wars, very important term, 1337 to 1453. Clear? And because we can say, because the English kings and barons, unlike those in other countries, depended upon their bowmen, bowmen मतलब जो तीर निशाना लगाते हैं, who came from the common people, who came from the common folk. These folk showed an independent spirit not to be found in peasants abroad. But long before the 100 Years' War, there had taken root in England certain ideas, certain practices that were far different from those of the other European countries. The term common law refers to law which is common to the whole country and all its people. Its contrast to kinds of law applying only to certain classes of person. And here I will discuss with you in detail the War of the Roses. So during the High Middle Ages, roughly from the 20th to the middle of the 14th century, the English of all classes lived comparatively well. And in 1348, however, came the Black Death, and the first of the series of plagues that killed more than half of the situation, even more than 1/3 of the population. So what happened? The scarcity of labor caused by the plague was the death knell of feudalism. And in 1381, inflamed by the repressive laws and the burdensome taxes, बहुत ज़्यादा taxes put up कर दिए गए थे, and encouraged by the teachings of the reformer, that religious reformer known as John Wycliffe, the peasants rose in the bloody revolt. And this revolt was put down harshly, but economic and social unrest continued. Then, hard on the heels of the 100 Years' War, known as the War of the Roses, a civil war between the House of York, whose emblem was the white roses, and the House of Lancaster, symbolized by a red rose. So when in 1485, Henry VII succeeded Richard III and united the feuding families through marriage, he ended the wars and founded the Tudor line of dynasty. So अगर पूछा जाए कि Tudor line कहाँ से आई, so it was only because of the coming of the Henry VII, due to which the Tudor dynasty came and the end of the War of the Roses. And when Henry VII came to the throne in 1485, the real Middle Age had vanished. Now we move on to John Gower. John Gower. We will discuss the first important poet of the 14th century, that is John Gower. Who was John Gower? John Gower, he was a poet like Chaucer who lived in Kent and who was a close friend and dedicated his Troilus in Cressida. Chaucer was a very close friend of Gower who dedicated his own Troilus in Cressida to Gower, and Chaucer used to call him Moral Gower because उसके सारे वर्क्स में you will find morality in it. And he also produced a large volume of poetry in three languages: French, Latin, and English. The French work is known as Speculum Meditantis, which is a long sermon in verse on the immortality of the age, क्योंकि उस एज में बहुत ज्यादा immortality भी काफी आ गई थी. So his French work, which is known as Speculum Meditantis, it is a long sermon in verse which gives you the detail about the immorality of the age. उसका जो लैटिन वर्क है उसका नाम है वॉक्स क्लेमेंटिस. वॉक्स क्लेमेंटिस जो लैटिन वर्क है, इट इज कंसर्न्ड विद वॉट टाइलर्स रिबेलियन, WAT, वॉट टाइलर्स, TYLER' रिबेलियन ऑफ 1381. फिर उसका इंग्लिश वर्क है जिसका नाम है कन्फेसियो एमेंटिस. दो इट इज रिटन इन द लैटिन वर्ड, उसका इंग्लिश का रूपांतर का मतलब होता है द लवर्स कन्फेशन. It is an enormous poem of 33,000 lines in octosyllabic lines. And Gower wrote this poem because King Richard complained that nobody wrote in the English tongue. King Richard उस समय जो राजा था उसने कहा देखिए इंग्लिश में तो कोई लिखता ही नहीं है. तो इस वजह से कि राजा थोड़ा खुश हो जाएं, he wrote this Confessio Amantis. And yes, the subject is love. Not because it is a poet's taste. इसलिए नहीं कि वो गावर का क्षेत्र था प्यार के बारे में लिखना, बट बिकॉज पीपल प्रिफर्ड अम्यूजमेंट कंपेयर टू विजडम. एंड द पोएम इज अबाउट द कन्फेशन ऑफ अ लवर, एमांस. लवर का नाम है अमंस, AMANS. ही इज प्रेजेंटिंग, ही इज कन्फेसिंग हिज लव. द पर्सन इज अमांस एंड ही इज कन्फेसिंग टू whom? He is confessing to Genius, GENIUS, a priest of Venus, and the stories are organized under the headings of 7 deadly sins. There are 8 books, one for each sin. हर एक sin की एक किताब है, and one which gives an account of philosophy and morals. The poem is also interesting for its prologue, for its epilogue, and in English, Gower wrote, "In praise of peace." उसका एक वर्क और है जिसका नाम है इन प्रेज ऑफ पीस. नाउ वी कम टू विलियम लैंगलैंड. विलियम लैंगलैंड, who is basically a contemporary of Chaucer, and he is known for his single work, which is his only extant poem, The Vision of William, concerning Piers the Plowman, which is a remarkable presentation and account of the sufferings of the peasants, which is so original. And it is also true that since times immemorial, literature has been busy pleasing the upper classes, but this was a poem which directly appeals to the common people, and thus it was an enormous successful poem. And this poem, the poet has given a lot of criticality, sarcasm, describing the corrupt clergies of that time, which is actually in contrast with the Chaucer's treatment of the theme in the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. He has also given a very real picture of the sufferings of the common man due to the corruptions in the upper strata. And the poet appears to be a sort of rebel against the feudal aristocratic system and the social inequality. The poem is actually a great moral allegory. Piers the Plowman appears again and again as the saver of the virtue in distress, where the poet falls asleep and sees a dream and a sorry scene, a field full of repentant sinners drawn for every section of society. They are all going out in a pilgrimage to the shrine of truth, but they do not know in the way. वो रास्ता नहीं जानते. And in this way, all the different sections of society are presented. Piers the Plowman appears on the scene and guides the way. So now I will talk about Chaucer's uniqueness. Chaucer was the first English great poet, and he remains unique till this day as one of the greatest. we shall not be far from truth if we say that among the English poets who have drawn inspiration from the human life and attempted to reproduce reality in their poems, taking reality as it is, not as the poets want to be, Chaucer is actually the greatest. It is therefore as a great poet of life that Chaucer has got the eminent position among all the poets of England, and his works have been so popular in all the civilized countries in the world and at all times, and will be for the time to come. His antique language, the remoteness of his subject matter to the common readers, he has always been a harbinger of joy and delight in the ordinary act of living and in all types of human activities. Chaucer has given them a poetry which is replete with joy, which is blended with joy, which is blended with power, which is blended with realization that the pageant life, with all its faults, with all its aberrations, is worth enjoying. And in this way, he has given entirely a new world of poetry, a new meaning, a new significance, and a new worthwhileness to the material aspects of life, which are undeniably the greatest importance in human existence. John Dryden, who was one of the great poets and a great critic, when delighted by Chaucer's poetry, could only exclaim, क्या बोला था उसने? Here is God's plenty. ये कई बार कोट आ चुका है. Here is God's plenty. ये किसने बोला, किसके लिए? Dryden for Chaucer. And this exclamation of appreciation epitomizes the great quality of Chaucer's poetry. Chaucer repeats the phrase law of kind very often. Law of kind, LAWOFKIND. This is a quote. He repeats the phrase law of kind very often. He means by it the natural order of things, the stream of life as it flows on from birth to death. And this is to him both law and impulse. And in conformity with it, he paints everything that life presents to him. He's a great painter. Human beings, birds, beasts, fields, hills, rivers, trees, planets, stars, all that inspires him. And he has that poetic skill, the poetic eye of imagination to enter into the very soul of each of one of them, and when describing it, make each fully alive and three-dimensional. This is the reason why in Chaucer's poetry there is no spirit of partisanship. And the 14th century England where he lived was by no means a happy land. The political, the social, the religious, the economic situation was extremely unsatisfactory. The Black Death and the Peasants' Revolt exposed the plague spots of the British life. And Chaucer lived amidst of all these scholars and saw everything. He did not protest or denounce, and the contemporary William Langland did not affect him at all. And like a true humanist with an unfailing sense of humor, he was interested in all the diverse shades of life. But his sympathetic curiosity in life would not have been so charming had it not been blended with clear self-knowledge. He never strikes up the pose of a superior person. He detached his detached but amused observation of life due to his long association with the court, long association with so many kings, is harmonized with a striking common sense about himself also. He looks at himself without illusions, judges himself without bitterness, is carried away by no desire to excel. He places himself on an average level and finds all the multitudes of men beside him.